Welcome to our True Ghost Stories segment on this channel. Today, I bring you a chilling tale from Ruby, a young woman who experienced an unexplainable haunting in a mysterious house. Have you ever felt an unseen presence or encountered eerie supernatural occurrences? Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support the channel and help us create more thrilling content. Story 1. My name is Ruby. I am 25 years old and live in Los Angeles, California. Ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by the afterlife, constantly researching supernatural occurrences. Throughout my life, I have encountered strange events, sometimes fleeting, but undeniable. 2 years ago, I took over my stepmother's job as a caregiver for an elderly woman named Margie. The Baca family was incredibly kind, which made me feel comfortable accepting the job. I had to stay at their house for a month, which didn't worry me, at least not until unexplainable things began happening. At first, everything was fine. Margie suffered from age-related memory loss, but she was sweet and full of humor. However, she had an odd habit. She would often point to empty spaces and say, "Look." I'd glance over, only to find nothing but air. It sent shivers down my spine, yet I dismissed it as part of her condition. Then, during my second week, things took a chilling turn. At night, I would hear strange noises in the hallway, slow, deliberate footsteps dragging across the floor. Sometimes, I caught the faint murmur of voices, as if someone was whispering just beyond the door. But when I opened it, all I saw was an empty, dimly lit corridor. One particular night, I was lying in bed watching a documentary about John Lennon on my DVD player. I started dozing off when suddenly, I sneezed. Just seconds later, a deep male voice echoed clearly in my room. "Bless you." My heart pounded as I shot up in bed. I rewound the documentary, searching for that phrase, but it was nowhere in the recording. I opened my door, scanning the silent hallway. The entire house was asleep. A cold dread settled over me, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. A few days later, another eerie incident occurred. I was sitting on my bed plucking my eyebrows and had left my tweezers beside me. Suddenly, my phone rang. After answering it, I turned back to grab my tweezers, but they were gone. Confused, I searched everywhere, stripping the bed, checking under it, even rummaging through my suitcase. They had vanished. Frustrated, I went to ask Paul, Margie's son, if he had taken them. He gave me a puzzled look and assured me he hadn't. When I returned to my room, my blood ran cold. The tweezers were lying perfectly in the middle of the bed, on the very spot I had just searched. A heavy silence filled the air, and I realized something was playing with me. The most terrifying event happened in my final week. One morning, as I was making my bed, I lifted and folded one side of the bedsheet. I then walked around to the other side to do the same, but froze in shock. The sheet was already neatly tucked in. My stomach dropped. I stood there, heart pounding, before cautiously whispering, "Thank you. Do you need help with anything?" The only response was the deafening silence. Shaken, I decided to tell Paul everything. He sighed and finally revealed the truth. Before his family bought the house, it had belonged to 2 women. When selling it, they had warned that spirits resided there but reassured that they were harmless. Paul and his family had lived there for over 30 years, but the strange occurrences never stopped. What unnerved me the most was what he said next. His wife had passed away in that house in 1999. He firmly believed that her spirit remained, watching over the home, tidying up, and keeping an eye on them just as she had in life. I realized that the room I was staying in had once belonged to their 2 eldest sons. Perhaps that was why she still lingered there. Despite my fear, I felt an odd sense of connection. I no longer saw the entity as a threat, but rather as a presence reaching out. This experience made me certain that I attract spirits, and maybe I can help them in some way. If you ever sense an unseen presence, don't panic. Not all spirits are malicious. Some simply wish to be acknowledged, while others may still be attached to their old lives. Stay calm, observe, and you may just have an encounter that defies all explanation. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next ghost story. Story 2. I have always been skeptical about ghosts. Sure, I enjoyed a good horror story now and then, but deep down, I believed that most hauntings could be explained logically. That was until I experienced something that changed my life forever. What happened to me and my girlfriend, Lily, in October 2004, at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery was beyond anything I could have imagined. Even now, years later, I still cannot shake the lingering fear it left behind. It all started as an innocent adventure. A birthday gift from Lily meant to be thrilling but harmless. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that followed us long after we left that cursed place. If you ever find yourself tempted to visit Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, let my story serve as a warning. We left home at noon on a Saturday under a dreary, overcast sky. The temperature was a chilling 42 degrees Fahrenheit, about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. And the damp air made it feel even colder. After an hour-and-a-half drive, we arrived and parked in the Forest Preserve's designated lot, as there was no other legal parking nearby. The path leading to the cemetery was narrow and surrounded by dense trees. As we neared the entrance, an inexplicable shiver ran down my spine. The atmosphere felt strangely heavy, pressing down on me like an unseen force. I turned on my voice recorder, but almost immediately noticed something bizarre. The time on the recorder skipped from the 17th second to the 23rd second. A few moments had mysteriously vanished. We ventured further into the cemetery, snapping photos at every turn. The gravestones were old and weathered, some cracked and leaning as if struggling to stand the test of time. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following our every move. More disturbingly, I felt an icy breath against the back of my neck. Though no one was behind me, a light drizzle began to fall, adding to the eerie ambiance. Lily, visibly unsettled, clung to my arm and urged me to leave. Still, I insisted on taking a few more photos before we left. Just as I asked her, "Take a picture of me here," an unfamiliar voice whispered in a mocking tone on my recorder. "Go ahead. Take it." Back at the car, I immediately played back the recording. What I heard made my blood run cold. Among the rustling and our footsteps, a chilling whisper hissed, "Get out of here now." I froze, my heart pounding wildly. I rewound the tape and listened again. There was no mistake. That voice was real. As I continued to listen, I detected strange sounds interspersed throughout the recording: heavy breathing, shuffling steps, and indistinct murmurs. I turned to Lily, whose face had gone pale with shock. We wasted no time in leaving the area. But little did we know, this trip had already set a terrifying chain of events into motion. That night, I began feeling unwell. At first, it was just a slight chill. But within hours, I was burning up with a fever of 101 degrees Fahrenheit, 38.3 degrees Celsius. A relentless cough racked my body, and my throat felt like it was on fire. This was highly unusual. I was rarely ever sick. Strangely, Lily also started feeling drained and suffered from an intense headache. The following morning, Lily visited me with her laptop, eager to review the photos we had taken. What we saw sent a wave of dread crashing over us. One picture showed a dark figure standing near a fallen tree, watching us. In another, a woman in a flowing white dress hovered above the ground, holding a bouquet of flowers. Even more unsettling, several images contained faint, distorted faces emerging from the mist. We tried to move on, but something from that cemetery had followed us. A month later, we were involved in a severe car accident. Thankfully, we escaped with minor injuries, but our vehicle was nearly totaled. Determined to put the past behind us, we pressed forward, but misfortune seemed to shadow our every step. Within a month, Lily lost her job without any clear explanation. Shortly afterward, I was inexplicably let go from my company of 4 years. No matter how many interviews we attended, neither of us could secure employment. Our health deteriorated rapidly. We were constantly plagued by colds, body aches, and persistent fatigue. But the worst was yet to come. In our apartment, strange occurrences became the norm. Lights flickered without reason. Cabinets creaked open on their own, and eerie noises echoed through the night. The breaking point came when Lily woke up screaming one night, claiming to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of our bed. I turned on the lights, but there was nothing, only a faint, dark smudge that slowly faded into nothingness. We endured this torment for almost a year before we were ultimately forced to leave our apartment. With no other options, we moved back in with my parents, struggling to rebuild our lives. It took months before we finally found new jobs and some semblance of stability. I am convinced that Bachelor's Grove Cemetery played a role in all of this. Before our visit, our lives were normal. After that day, everything crumbled. I never used to believe in curses or supernatural forces. But after what I experienced, I no longer have any doubts. 2 years have passed, yet I still keep the photos and recordings. Every so often, I listen to the eerie whispers and relive the chilling encounters. I have even attempted to submit the photos to paranormal investigation sites. But for some reason, they were never published. If you are considering exploring haunted locations, think twice. Some places should be left undisturbed. The spirits in Bachelor's Grove do not welcome intruders. Welcome to Story 3. Have you ever experienced a moment that made you question the boundary between the real world and the unseen? Have you ever seen something that shouldn't exist? Something that doesn't belong to this reality? Supernatural occurrences have always been a controversial topic. Some believe, while others dismiss them as mere imagination. But there are moments, terrifying, unexplainable moments, where no amount of skepticism can erase what your own eyes have witnessed. Tonight, I will share with you one of the most haunting experiences of my life, an eerie night on an empty road, where I came face to face with something beyond comprehension. I have encountered many supernatural events throughout the years. My great-grandmother was a gifted psychic, and I believe I inherited a small fraction of her ability to see what others cannot. This will be the first of many true stories I hope to share with you. It was around 1980 when this particular incident happened. I was driving home late at night. It was nearing midnight when I approached a steep hill. As my headlights illuminated the road ahead, I saw a man. He was wearing a long coat and a hat. His head tilted downward as he slowly stepped into the middle of the road. His movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. At that moment, I also noticed the headlights of another car approaching from the opposite direction. It was climbing the hill, its driver unaware of the figure standing in the road. I knew, with absolute certainty, that they wouldn't have enough time to stop. The man would be hit. I slammed my brakes, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the inevitable impact. But instead of the sickening sound of a collision, I heard nothing. The other car sped past. Completely unaffected, I opened my eyes and saw the man walking straight through the hood of my car. A cold wave of terror crashed over me. My breath caught in my throat. My hands gripped the steering wheel. Frozen in shock, I watched as the man continued his slow, deliberate steps, crossing the street as though nothing had happened. I didn't wait to process what I had seen, I just drove, pushing my car forward with an urgency I had never felt before. My mind was reeling, struggling to rationalize what had just occurred. But the nightmare was far from over. 2 miles down the road, something even stranger happened. A military jeep suddenly appeared out of nowhere, swerving into my path. I barely had time to react. I honked my horn, slamming my brakes once more, preparing for the impact. But just as before, the vehicle vanished before my very eyes. I sat there in stunned silence, my body trembling, my breath uneven. The road stretched ahead of me, empty and still, as if nothing had ever been there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Perhaps my exhaustion was playing tricks on me? Perhaps I had imagined it? But no, the fear in my chest was too real. And then, something else caught my attention. A flickering light in the distance. Hesitant but compelled, I slowly drove toward it. As I neared, I realized it was an old gas station, desolate, abandoned. Yet its neon sign still flickered weakly as if beckoning me forward. Something about it felt off. I parked my car and stepped out, feeling an eerie chill in the air. The place looked like it had been left untouched for decades. Yet the smell of gasoline lingered faintly. Curiosity gnawed at me. I walked toward the station, pushing the door open with a creak. Dust coated the countertops, and faded newspapers lay scattered across the floor. My eyes scanned the room when suddenly, a rustling sound came from the back. My breath hitched. Was someone, or something, there? The air grew colder. I turned my head toward a row of old, shattered windows, my pulse quickening. Then, in the reflection of the cracked glass, I saw him. The same man from the road. He stood motionless, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My body refused to move. His presence radiated an unsettling stillness, as if time itself had frozen. Then, in an instant, the lights flickered violently, and the room was plunged into darkness. I bolted out of the station, scrambling into my car. My hands fumbled for the keys, my breathing ragged, as the engine roared to life. I dared one last glance at the station. The man was gone. I pressed the gas pedal, tearing away from that haunted place. The radio crackled with static, and for a moment, a faint whisper echoed through the speakers. A voice, distant yet eerily close. "You saw me." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I turned the radio off and drove in silence, the weight of my experience pressing down on me. Even now, I cannot say with certainty what I encountered that night. Was he a lost soul? A remnant of a forgotten tragedy? Or something far more sinister? Experiences like these are more than just frightening. They force us to confront the unknown. Were these spirits of the past reliving their final moments in a perpetual loop? Was the man on the hill someone who had once died in a tragic accident? His ghost doomed to repeat his final walk for eternity? And what about the military jeep? Was it a remnant of a forgotten past? A spectral memory playing itself out on the same road? And that gas station, was it a beacon for lost souls? Forever trapped in time? I don't have the answers. But I know one thing for certain. What I saw that night was real. Perhaps you have encountered something similar. Perhaps, late at night on an empty road, you too have glimpsed a shadow from another world. Do you believe in ghosts? Or have you ever faced something you couldn't explain? If so, you are not alone. Story 4. Hello. My name is... Well, actually, all you need to know is that I am someone obsessed with uncovering urban legends and supernatural mysteries. My real name doesn't matter. Just call me the Ghost Hunter. For the past 3 years, I have been exploring eerie locations and digging deep into haunted folklore in Ohio. I even started a website to document my findings. Though, to be honest, I'm too lazy to update it regularly. Tonight, I will tell you one of the most disturbing experiences I have ever had. It all happened in Southwest Ohio, a place notorious for its ghost stories. Among the countless tales of spectral encounters and eerie screams in the night, there is one legend that stands above the rest: the light. According to legend, a young couple was forbidden by their families from seeing each other. Desperate, they arranged secret meetings on a secluded road. The girl would take her father's car, drive to the end of the road, and flash her headlights 3 times to signal her lover to come running. One fateful night, as the boy sped toward her on his motorcycle, he failed to see a child on a bicycle in the dark. Unable to stop in time, he crashed straight into the boy. Both of them died on the spot. Overcome with grief, the girl later hung herself in a barn nearby. Today, all that remains are its charred ruins. People say that if you go to the exact location where the girl once flashed her headlights and do the same, you will see eerie red lights, resembling the reflection of a bicycle, and then the blinding glow of an approaching motorcycle. Some have even claimed to witness flickering lights, like those of a horrific accident, before the spectral headlights vanish into nothingness. Intrigued, my friend Tony and I decided to test the legend ourselves. Armed with cameras, 2-way radios, and a detailed plan, we set out on a Thursday night, determined to debunk the story. Tony would drive while I observed from the roadside. When we reached the exact location, he would flash the headlights 3 times, and I would monitor any activity while keeping in contact via the radio. After grabbing some greasy food from Burger King, we arrived at Oxford Milford Road at exactly 9:50 p.m. The road was desolate, lined with overgrown bushes and scattered rural homes. Barely illuminated by streetlights, we parked at the supposed haunted spot and signaled 3 times. And then, it appeared. A small, flickering blue-white light floated along the road ahead. My heart pounded as I shouted, "Tony, there's a car. Start the engine. We don't want to cause an accident." But Tony, ever the skeptic, wasn't so quick to flee. "That's not a car," he murmured, eyes locked on the drifting glow. The light faded, then reappeared, moving slowly down the hill but never actually reaching us. My hands fumbled with the camera, desperately trying to capture the anomaly. Then Tony pointed at the windshield. The weird thing is, the light is in front of us, but the windshield is reflecting it as if it's behind us. It looks like it's underwater. As the light vanished, we decided to drive around the area, searching for an explanation. We soon returned to the original spot, this time turning the car to face the approaching glow directly. The light was already there, waiting for us. Even before we cut the engine, it flickered like an otherworldly signal. This time, it was impossibly bright, far too intense to be a prankster's flashlight. "What the hell is that?" I yelled as Tony, wide-eyed, gripped the wheel. Then, in a burst of adrenaline, he floored the gas pedal, charging straight toward the ghostly glow. And then, nothing. The road was empty. We sat in stunned silence before turning back. If it was a trick, we wanted to catch whoever was behind it. But when we returned, the eerie glow was gone. Frustrated, we parked again, this time keeping the car running. I grabbed my camera and stepped out onto the road, determined to find something tangible. The air was unusually still, too still. I clicked my flashlight on and scanned the area. The abandoned barn ruins stood eerily in the distance, its skeletal remains barely visible under the dim moonlight. A sudden gust of wind sent a chill down my spine, carrying with it the faintest whisper, like a girl sobbing. And then, something knocked against the car. Tony screamed. What the hell was that? Spinning around, I saw nothing, just shadows. But when I turned back to Tony, his face had drained of color. His eyes were locked onto the backseat window. "What's wrong?" I whispered, my own voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he shakily pointed at the glass. Slowly, I turned my gaze, and my stomach dropped. There, written in foggy condensation, was a message. "Don't look for me." My vision blurred as panic took over. Tony jammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as we sped away. Even as we fled, I caught one final glimpse of the road through the side mirror. The blue-white light was still there, but this time, it was closer. The next morning, I gathered enough courage to review the footage from my camera. The light was there, exactly as we had seen it, but there was something else I hadn't noticed before. A shadowy figure standing at the edge of the road, watching us. Looking back, I still don't know what we encountered that night. Was it just an optical illusion? A local prank? Or something beyond explanation? Science has yet to provide an answer. But here's what I do know. The legend of the light is not just a story. I saw it, I recorded it, and I will never forget it. So, if you ever find yourself driving down Oxford-Milford Road at night, and you see an unexplainable glow in the distance, do not stop, do not flash your lights, and whatever you do not try to find it. Story 5. There are things in this world that science has yet to explain. Strange phenomena appear briefly in a person's life, like reminders that reality is not as simple as we think. For me, this experience was not just an illusion or a story woven from imagination. It is a clear, powerful memory that has haunted me for the past 30 years. About 30 years ago, on an ordinary afternoon like any other, I was on my way back to work after my lunch break. The day was warm, the sky was a brilliant shade of blue, and a light breeze rustled through the leaves of the towering trees lining the road. Everything felt peaceful, routine, utterly unremarkable, until I saw it. Right above the treetops, hovering in midair, was a massive airplane. But it was unlike any airplane I had ever seen. It was an almost blinding shade of white, so pure that it seemed to glow, radiating an eerie, unearthly light. What shocked me even more was that it didn't have the usual airplane wings. Instead, it had enormous angelic wings that stretched outward, pristine and feathered like something from a biblical vision. On the side of the aircraft, I could see letters and numbers in dark blue. I tried to remember them, but over time, those characters faded from my memory. However, one thing remained crystal clear: the two passengers on that plane. A young girl, with long, flowing hair, was waving cheerfully at the pedestrians below. Her smile carried something ethereal, something serene, as if she knew a secret that none of us did. She looked so at ease, so weightless, as though she belonged up there more than down here. Beside her sat a man. He seemed completely uninterested in what was happening around him, engrossed in reading a newspaper, as if he was in his own world, detached from the surreal scene unfolding. At that moment, I froze, unable to move. I looked around, searching for any reaction from the people on the street. But no one looked up. No one noticed the massive plane floating right above them. A deep sense of unease crept over me. My heart pounded in my chest. Was I witnessing something not meant for human eyes? Or was there something wrong with me? Had I slipped into some sort of waking dream? Just then, the blaring sound of a car horn jolted me back to reality. A driver behind me honked furiously, urging me to move. I pointed upward, trying to show them what I was seeing. But they only looked at me with confusion and kept honking. Forced to merge back into traffic, I continued driving. My workplace was only 3 blocks away, but my mind was in complete turmoil. I had to be sure that what I had seen was real. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, hoping to catch one last glimpse of the glowing airplane. But it was already slipping beyond my field of view. As soon as I arrived, I rushed up to the 14th floor where I worked. I ran to the window, my eyes scanning the sky, desperately searching for that mysterious airplane. But it was gone. There was no trace of it against the bright blue sky. The air seemed still, as if nothing had ever been there at all. I tried telling my colleagues about what I had just witnessed, but they only laughed, assuming I was either stressed or making up some ridiculous story. A few of them patted me on the back and jokingly asked if I had been drinking during lunch. I shook my head, frustrated, but I knew what I saw. I could still feel its presence, still see the angelic wings and the 2 enigmatic passengers. The image was seared into my mind like a brand. Years have passed, but I have never been able to forget that sight. I have asked myself countless times, was it a sign? A warning? A farewell from someone who had passed on? Or was it simply a fleeting moment? A crack between reality and another world that I just happened to glimpse? Could it have been an omen? Or some sort of celestial passage carrying souls between realms? Sometimes, I blame myself. I should have pulled over, taken a longer look, taken a photo, anything to have tangible proof of what I had seen. But all I have is this memory, an unshakable memory of an unsolvable mystery. I don't expect anyone to believe my story. I only hope that if one day you witness something beyond explanation, you won't dismiss it too quickly. Because perhaps, the most miraculous and mysterious things only appear to those who are willing to believe in them. And maybe, just maybe, if we keep our minds open, we might catch another fleeting glimpse of the unknown. Something waiting just beyond the veil of our understanding. Story 6. Some childhood memories never fade. They linger in the corners of our minds, resurfacing when we least expect them. One such memory from my early years in Vermont has haunted me for decades. It was during a time when my family was renovating our old countryside home. The house had been in our family for generations, a grand Victorian relic that bore the weight of time with its creaking floors and weathered walls. One summer, my parents decided to strip the faded wallpaper lining the stairwell leading to my bedroom. Beneath the layers of age-old decor, they found a rough, uneven surface. To prepare for the next stage of renovation, they applied a coat of plaster, smoothing it out in anticipation of tiling the walls with cork and mirrors the next day. That night, something happened that made me question reality itself. The air was heavy with the scent of drying plaster. The house had been quiet that evening, my parents having retired early after a long day of labor. My older brother was asleep in the adjacent room, and even Whiskers, our family cat, had found his usual perch on the windowsill. I recall lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of an inexplicable unease settling over me. It was the kind of tension that made the hair on your arms stand on end. As if something unseen was in the room with you, watching. A creak sounded from the hallway. I held my breath, my heart pounded in my ears as I turned my head slowly toward the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Shadows flickered along the walls, cast by the dim glow of the street lamp outside. And then, I saw it. Something moved just beyond the threshold, a faint glow, like the soft shimmer of moonlight on water, pulsing ever so slightly. I sat up, my pulse hammering in my throat. The glow remained still for a moment before drifting closer, its form shifting, bending the air around it. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. My limbs felt frozen, as if my body refused to obey the commands my brain was desperately sending. I had always been a light sleeper, often waking up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. It was an old habit, one I never grew out of. That night was no different. In the dim glow of moonlight filtering through the large window at the end of the hall, I noticed the old rocking chair in the corner of my room. That chair had been in the family for ages, and it was where our cat, Whiskers, usually curled up to sleep. My glasses were on my bedside table, and without them, my vision was blurry. Still, I could make out a shape that resembled Whiskers resting on the chair. As I walked past, I reached out absent-mindedly to pet him. My hand went straight through. I froze. A chill, like ice laced with electricity, shot up my fingers, numbing my arm almost to my elbow. It wasn't just cold, it was a piercing, unnatural frost that didn't belong in a warm summer night. And then, it moved. The shape lifted from the chair, shifting like mist caught in a breeze. But it wasn't mist, it was a pulsing, swirling mass of blue-white light, glowing faintly as though drawing the very energy from the room. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. But instead of running, I did something that, looking back, was completely irrational. I chased it. The glowing mass floated toward the stairwell, hovering just above the steps, bobbing slightly as if deciding whether to descend. And then, in one swift motion, it darted forward and passed straight through the wall. I rushed to the window overlooking the backyard, scanning for any sign of it. For the briefest moment, I saw it, drifting just above the old wooden fence and the tomato vines in our neighbor's yard. Then, it did something even stranger. It didn't just disappear, it twisted into itself, folding inward in an impossible way, like a shadow consuming itself from the inside out. And then, it was gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the night sky, waiting for something, anything, to reappear. But nothing did. Eventually, the pressing need that had woken me up in the first place made itself known again. So I went downstairs, used the restroom, and climbed back into bed, my mind racing with questions. I told myself I would mention it in the morning. But I never did. The next morning, as I groggily made my way downstairs, I stopped short. The freshly plastered wall was covered in markings. Not scratches, not indentations from someone leaning against it. These were deep, jagged lines carved into the smooth surface, forming intricate patterns that made no immediate sense. My first thought was whiskers. Maybe he had clawed at the wall in the night? But that theory didn't hold up. These marks weren't simple scratches. They had a deliberate shape to them, like an unfamiliar script, as if someone, or something, had been trying to write a message. What unsettled me the most was how the marks were formed. When you drag your finger through something soft, like wet sand or cake frosting, the material is pushed outward, creating raised edges around the grooves. But these symbols had no such displacement. The surface around them was untouched, as if they had emerged from within the plaster itself. My brother and I spent the next hour trying to decipher them. We looked at them from different angles, even using a mirror to see if they spelled something in reverse. But nothing made sense. Years later, I found myself in an old bookstore, flipping through an antique volume on esoteric symbols. My breath caught in my throat when I turned a page and saw something eerily familiar. Patterns that closely resembled the ones carved into my childhood home's wall. According to the book, these symbols had been recorded in various haunted sites across history, believed to be messages from spirits attempting to bridge the gap between their world and ours. I slammed the book shut, a chill running down my spine. Had I been contacted? Had something tried to reach me that night, only to be silenced by time and renovation? I still wonder about that glowing entity. Had it been trying to communicate? Had it left those symbols behind as a message? Or was it something else entirely? Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, expecting to see that eerie glow hovering in the corner of my room. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder, what if it comes back? Story 7. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another chilling tale. This is the 7th story in our second video. And let me tell you, this one is truly unsettling. It is based on real events, though we have changed the names and locations for privacy reasons. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, some stories leave behind an eerie trace, an unexplainable presence that lingers long after they're told. So, without further ado, let's dive into this haunting experience. It all started when Henry and Claire moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of a small town. The house had been abandoned for years, its history shrouded in mystery. The locals avoided it, whispering about strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions seen through the broken windows. Some even claimed that the house had a presence, as if it were watching them. For Henry, a journalist eager for an affordable place to live, and Claire, an artist who found beauty in decayed aesthetics, the house was perfect. But from the very first night, something felt off. The walls seemed to absorb sound, making every whisper feel amplified, and the air carried a musty, almost damp scent that never went away. no matter how much they aired out the rooms. The first few days passed uneventfully. They spent their time cleaning, decorating, and making the house feel like home. But soon, Claire began noticing odd things. A painting she had placed on the floor in the attic had moved, and shadows seemed to shift unnaturally in the corners of her vision. Henry dismissed it as paranoia. Then, one night, Claire woke up gasping for air. She had dreamt of a woman standing at the foot of their bed, her hollow eyes staring straight into her soul. But it wasn't just a dream. Henry, too, had seen a shadow flickering in the dim moonlight. It stood motionless in the corner before vanishing into the darkness. Strange sounds became more frequent, faint knocking on the walls at night, indistinct murmurs that seemed to echo from within the floors. Then, there was the attic door. Claire swore she had locked it, but every morning, it stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Things escalated quickly. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty hallways at night. Whispering voices seemed to drift from the attic, and objects moved inexplicably. The worst was the basement. A door that was nailed shut had somehow swung open one morning, revealing a dark, damp stairwell leading down into nothingness. The air from below was thick, almost suffocating, carrying a scent of something long decayed. One evening, as Claire was painting in her studio, she heard a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, deliberate. It came from the attic. When Henry finally worked up the courage to investigate, he found something that made his blood run cold: a child's rocking chair, swaying back and forth on its own. Nearby, he found an old, dusty doll, its fabric face worn and cracked, but its button eyes still gleamed eerily in the dim attic light. He could have sworn it had been facing the wall when he first entered. But now, it was looking directly at him. Determined to uncover the truth, Henry began researching the history of their home. What he found sent chills down his spine. The house had belonged to a widow named Margaret Holloway in the early 1900s. After her husband died under mysterious circumstances, Margaret became reclusive, eventually vanishing without a trace. The townspeople whispered that she had dabbled in dark rituals, trying to communicate with her late husband. Some believed she had succeeded, but not in the way she had hoped. Locals claimed her spirit remained bound to the house, trapped by the very forces she had summoned. As Henry dug deeper, the haunting intensified. Claire refused to be alone, and the house's atmosphere became suffocating. The breaking point came when they found a message scratched into the mirror in their bathroom: "Leave now." Then, one night, they were awoken by the unmistakable sound of sobbing, coming from inside their own bedroom. Claire turned on the light, only to see the closet door creak open by itself. A cold gust of air rushed out, carrying a whisper that sent them running out of the house. But just as they reached the door, they heard a shriek, a long, agonizing wail that rattled the very walls around them. Before they could reach the front yard, the house seemed to shudder, as if exhaling. The lights flickered wildly, and the air turned ice cold. Claire felt something, someone, brush past her, and for a brief second, she could see her breath in the air. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, fumbling with the keys in panic. They never went back. Within a week, they sold the property at a loss and moved far away. The new owners? They, too, left within months. No one stayed for long. Years later, Henry found himself drawn back to the town out of morbid curiosity. He stood across the street from the house, watching its darkened windows, It looked the same, untouched, as if waiting for its next victims. Just as he was about to leave, he saw movement. A curtain in the upstairs window shifted, as though someone had been watching him. He never returned again. Was it all a psychological trick? A result of living in an old, creaky house? Or was something truly there, lurking in the shadows, bound to that place for eternity? Some say that late at night, you can still hear the whispers through the walls, the faint creak of the rocking chair, and, if you're unlucky enough, the chilling cry of the widow herself. I'll leave that for you to decide. But one thing is certain, some houses were never meant to be lived in. So, what do you think? Would you have stayed, or would you have run like Henry and Claire? Let me know in the comments below. Story 8. There are moments in life that we recall with eerie clarity. Memories so vivid that they seem to have been burned into the very fabric of our minds. Some of these memories are joyful, filled with warmth and laughter. Others, however, linger in the shadows, surfacing when night falls and silence stretches too long. This is one such memory. A night that started as innocent fun but ended with questions that have never been answered. When I was a child, my father had a peculiar way of entertaining guests. While most families in our neighborhood played cards or board games, my father always sought something different. One evening, he introduced a new activity, table rocking. It was meant to be a harmless trick, a way to add excitement to the gathering. Little did we know, that night would mark the beginning of an experience that I would never forget. I remember it vividly. I was around 7 years old, and my father asked me to help him rock the table. We used the large dining room table, a solid cherry wood piece that could seat 12 people. As a family of 10, we lived in a spacious 5-bedroom house that sat on 40 acres of land. The dining room, like the rest of the house, was grand, with tall windows and an old chandelier that cast eerie shadows at night. The house itself had a long history, dating back to the early 1800s, with whispers of strange occurrences passed down from previous owners. That evening, we moved all the chairs against the walls and positioned the table in the center of the room. My father stood at one end while I stood at the other, both placing only the palms of our hands on the table. He instructed me to clear my mind and focus on one thought: if there is someone here, rock the table. I repeated the phrase over and over in my head. At first, nothing happened. Then, a faint creaking sound filled the air, and the table moved slightly, as if someone were trying to rise from a seat. The air grew heavy, and I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My father continued to ask questions, using a simple yes or no system: 1 rock for no, 2 rocks for yes. The responses were slow at first, but soon, the table began to react with more force. When he asked if the spirit could lift the table onto one leg and move it in a circle, the answer was a firm, bone-jarring yes. What happened next sent chills down my spine. The table rocked violently before tipping onto 2 legs, then balanced precariously on just one. It began to rotate in place, forcing us to walk with it to maintain our grip. Soon, our pace quickened, and I had to run to keep up. The guests, once amused, were now terrified. My father and I never applied more pressure than the light touch of our palms. Yet the table was moving with an energy of its own. The tension in the room thickened. The chandelier above swayed, though there was no draft. A cold breeze wrapped around my ankles, and I heard faint whispers, soft, unintelligible words floating just beyond recognition. My father's voice trembled slightly as he asked another question. "Who are you?" The table gave 2 sharp jerks. "Yes." "Did you live here?" "A single rock." "No." "Do you want us to stop?" Silence. The table didn't move, but the air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, in a sudden moment, I lost my grip. The table crashed back down onto all 4 legs and stood motionless. The room was silent. My stepmother, her face pale, rushed forward to inspect the table, as if expecting it to be broken from the ordeal. But there wasn't a single scratch. Then the lights flickered. A scraping sound echoed from the hallway, as if furniture was being dragged across the floor. I turned my head sharply, but nothing was there. The guests huddled together, their eyes darting nervously. The night didn't end there. Later, after the guests left, I lay in bed unable to sleep. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Then, just as I began to drift off, I heard it. 3 loud knocks on my bedroom door. My heart pounded. The hallway was empty when I peeked out, but a cold draft wrapped around my shoulders, sending shivers down my spine. Over the next few weeks, strange things continued to happen. Objects in the house moved on their own. The chandelier in the dining room swayed when there was no wind. My younger sister woke up screaming one night, claiming she saw a shadow standing at the foot of her bed. My father, once skeptical, started locking the dining room door at night. Whatever had responded to us that evening had not left. One evening, months after that night, we had family friends over again. The topic of the table came up, and one of the guests laughed, saying, "You really had us fooled." My father forced a smile but didn't respond. As the conversation continued, I noticed my stepmother looking toward the dining room door. Her face was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. I followed her gaze and saw it, just for a second. A dark figure, standing in the dimly lit hallway, watching us. That was the last time my father ever attempted to rock the table. A week later, he dismantled it and placed it in storage. He never explained why, but I knew. The house never felt the same after that night. Some say the house itself held secrets, that it stood on land rich with history, where unseen forces lingered. Others believed it was merely the power of suggestion, that our belief in the supernatural had manifested the event. But I know what I saw, and even now, after all these years, I still wonder, what, or who, was really in that room with us that night? Perhaps some doors should never be opened, even in the name of harmless fun. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true accounts of the unexplained, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Who knows? The next story might just be yours. Story 9. Hello everyone. Gather round. It's time for another tale. One that will send shivers down your spine and make you think twice before driving alone at night. Have you ever been on an empty highway in the dead of night, with nothing but the sound of your tires rolling against the pavement? You tell yourself it's just another late-night drive. But then, something happens. The shadows play tricks on your eyes. The air suddenly feels heavier. And before you know it, you're gripping the steering wheel tighter, your heartbeat quickening, convinced that something, or someone, is watching you from the darkness. This is one of those stories, a tale of the supernatural, pulled from the eerie stretches of Highway 96. And if you ever find yourself driving through Georgia in the middle of the night, You might want to keep your eyes open. Because who knows, you might just see her too. It was a long drive home. I had spent days on the road, traveling from Texas back to Georgia. The night was thick and heavy, and the clock on my dashboard blinked 2:30 a.m. in the dim glow of my headlights. Finally, after hours of driving, I crossed the state line into Georgia. Relief washed over me. I was almost home, but that relief didn't last long. As I merged onto Highway 96, a strange light flickered in the distance, just off to the left side of the road. At first, it was barely noticeable, like a wisp of fog catching the moonlight. But as I got closer, the shape became clearer. A woman. She stood there, motionless, hovering just a few inches above the ground. Her hair hung in loose waves over her shoulders, and her dress, though tattered, seemed to ripple in an unseen breeze. But the most disturbing part? She had no legs. The form of her body simply faded away into nothingness from the knees down. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. My foot eased off the accelerator as my mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could react, I had already passed her. My hands gripped the wheel as I stole a glance into my rearview mirror. She was still there, standing in the same spot, untouched by time or space, as if she hadn't noticed me at all. I wasn't sleepy. I wasn't under the influence. I was fully aware, my senses sharp after hours on the road. And yet, there she was, unmistakable and horrifyingly real. My instincts screamed at me to keep driving. And I did, but my curiosity burned just as fiercely. Who was she? Why was she there? And more importantly, had anyone else seen her before? What followed was a series of encounters that would confirm my worst fears. That Highway 96 was no ordinary road. That I was not the only one who had seen the woman in white. And that she was not alone. The next day, unable to shake the eerie encounter from my mind, I did some research. I scoured online forums and local stories, looking for any mention of a ghostly woman appearing along Highway 96. What I found left me speechless. Multiple accounts, different drivers, all reporting the same thing: a woman in white, hovering just above the road, her lower half missing. Some had seen her standing still, just as I had. Others claimed she had suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, causing them to swerve violently to avoid her, only to find nothing there when they looked back. One truck driver wrote about a chilling experience from 5 years ago. He had been driving late at night when he saw her in his headlights. He honked his horn, hoping to scare off what he thought was a lost pedestrian. But she didn't move. As his truck got closer, she turned her head towards him and smiled. Her face was wrong, her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, her eyes dark voids that seemed to swallow the light. The truck driver slammed his brakes, but the moment he blinked, she was gone. Another story came from a retired sheriff. He recalled an accident that had happened decades ago on that very stretch of highway. A woman had been driving home late at night when she lost control of her car and veered off the road. She wasn't found until morning, her car crumpled against a tree, her body mangled beyond recognition. The official report listed driver fatigue as the cause, but locals believed otherwise. They whispered that she had seen something on the road, something that had caused her to swerve in terror. Could it have been her own ghost she was running from? The deeper I dug, the more sinister the stories became. One man recounted how he had been walking home late one evening when he heard soft whispers behind him. He turned, expecting to see another traveler. But instead, he was met with an empty road. Yet, the whispers continued, growing louder, until they became wails of agony. Panicked, he ran, but the wails followed. Only when he crossed a small bridge did the sounds cease. That bridge, as it turned out, was known as the Crying Bridge. According to legend, a woman had thrown herself off of it years ago, drowning in the dark waters below. Some said she had been pregnant, abandoned by her lover. Others claimed she had been chased by something unseen, something that had forced her to take that final plunge. Whatever the truth, her cries still echoed through the night, haunting anyone who dared to pass. Then, there was the story of the man in the pickup truck. A young couple, out for a late-night drive, had spotted an old truck idling by the side of the road. As they approached, they saw a man sitting inside, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He stared straight ahead, unblinking, unmoving, concerned. They pulled over and knocked on the window. The man didn't react. The couple tried again. No response. It was only when the boyfriend reached for the door handle that the man suddenly turned his head toward them. His face was decayed. His skin hung in loose patches. His hollow eyes filled with something far beyond terror. The couple ran, speeding away without looking back. The next day, they returned with a police officer, but the truck was gone. No sign of it had ever been recorded, and no one could explain what they had seen. Had they witnessed the remnants of a man who had died on that road? Or had they encountered something else entirely? I shut my laptop, my heart pounding. Had I really seen her? Was she a lost soul, doomed to wander the highway for eternity? Or was she something far worse? One thing was certain. I would never drive that road at night again. And if you ever find yourself traveling down Highway 96 after dark, I suggest you keep your eyes on the road. Because if you happen to see a woman in white, standing just ahead, whatever you do, don't stop. She's been waiting for you. Story 10. Welcome, dear listeners, to another unsettling journey into the unknown. Tonight, we unravel a story that comes straight from the eerie depths of a family home in Indiana. This isn't just a tale spun from imagination, it's a real account. A chilling experience that remains unexplained to this day. If you've ever felt a presence in your home, seen something move when it shouldn't, or heard an unexplainable sound in the dead of night, then you might just find yourself relating to this story. Let's step into the shadows and listen carefully. This is the story of Horseshoe and the strange occurrences in the basement. There were many strange things that happened in the house where I grew up in Indiana. I've shared stories before, of the shadowy figure in the chair, of the mysterious markings on the walls. But this story? This one has stuck with me the longest. It was a late evening. My mother, my brother Chuck, and I were in the living room, watching TV as we usually did. The house was quiet, nothing out of the ordinary, until a loud crash shattered the silence. The sound was deafening, echoing through the house from below. It wasn't just a bump or a creak, it was the unmistakable clang of metal hitting concrete. We froze. Our house had an old basement, half dirt floor, half concrete, a space used for storage, old cans of paint, fishing gear, various tools and storm windows, a large deep freezer where we kept frozen pork and beef, a drain hole where the washing machine emptied, the furnace and water heater. The ceiling of the basement was exposed wooden beams, the very floor we were sitting on above. And somewhere down there, something had made a terrible noise. Curiosity and unease battled within us. But together, we made our way to the basement stairs. The stairs leading down were old, wooden, with open risers. Our German shepherd always avoided the basement, as if the very air down there unsettled him. Now, standing at the top of the stairs, we looked down at the basement floor. A horseshoe lay there, not just any horseshoe, one of the heavy, silver-painted ones we used for a game of horseshoes. We had 2 sets, silver and red. These were real, solid horseshoes, not the light, plastic ones made for casual play. A chip of concrete marked where it had struck the floor. We stood, staring, processing the impossibility of it. And then, before our very eyes, the second silver horseshoe fell. It wasn't just the sound of it hitting the ground that sent chills through me. It was what I saw as it landed. For a fraction of a second, I saw something, a pale, thin shape, flickering like a shadow made of light. It rose from the impact of the horseshoe, standing at an angle, almost as if startled by its own movement. I gasped. Chuck and Mom only saw the horseshoe fall. They didn't see the flicker. But I did. We questioned everything. Could we have knocked it loose? Could vibrations have dislodged them? But no. We were standing still when the second horseshoe fell. The following week, a similar event happened, but this time, it was worse. It was just Chuck and me at home. Our mother had gone out for the evening. We were sitting in the kitchen, having a late snack, when we heard a metallic clang. This time, it was followed by another noise, something scraping against concrete. Chuck, startled, grabbed a flashlight, and we rushed to the basement. To our horror, the 2 red horseshoes, which had also been securely hung on another wooden beam, were now lying on the floor. But there was more. A deep, deliberate-looking scratch had appeared on the concrete near where they landed. It looked fresh. Something wasn't just knocking these horseshoes down. It was interacting with them. Chuck, taller than both of us, reached up to check the nail from which they had fallen. It was secure, firm, unmoved. The only way the horseshoes could have fallen was if something had lifted them over the head of the nail and dropped them. Something unseen. We hung the horseshoes back where they belonged and returned to the living room. Silent, none of us wanted to be the first to ask, what just happened? That night, we listened, we waited, but nothing else fell, nothing else moved, and in the months following, the horseshoes never fell again. They had hung there undisturbed for weeks before that night. So why had they fallen at that moment? And what was the pale, flickering shape I had seen? There are moments in life that defy explanation. This was one of them. Was it a spirit, a warning, a mere coincidence, or something trying to make itself known? We may never know, but one thing is certain. Something, or someone, made those horseshoes fall that night. And for a brief moment, I saw it. Some stories linger in the back of your mind for years. This is one of those stories. And now, it's yours to ponder as well.